The T-34-85M, it's supposed to be a tank very similar to the regular T-34, but with increased armor. And the gun, it's the 85mm ZIS S53. But it can pretty much do everything the regular T-34-85 can, and a lot more. I'm gonna add both to the comparison. Go into the configuration, 100% crew, just to compare them. Now, the T-34-85 and the T-34-85M. The M, for some reason, has superior firepower. It does the same damage, penetrates the same, and shoots faster. Now, when you look at the T-34, the regular T-34, notice the gun. The gun, it's as long as the truck. That's because this is the D-34-85M, which is, in theory, a superior gun to the ZIS S53. At least on the regular tank it is. So this is the ZIS S53. If I mount it, you can see it is only slightly as long as the door of the truck. So they are different model guns, and it's natural for one, at least the longer one, to perform better than the shorter version. In reality, I don't know about the 85BM, where it comes from. I guess it's some not very known prototype, but the D5T, just D5T, which can be found in some tanks, let's see, Su-85, I think, has this gun. D5S, I guess it's just a similar version. In terms of performance, or how much it penetrated, it's supposed to be very similar to the ZIS S53. The ZIS S53 was simply easier to produce. So the ZIS S53 has 126mm of penetration with AP and 167 with APCR. But then you go and look at the T-34-85M and the ZIS S53 simply has copy-pasted performance from the D5T-85BM. You can see it's indeed the ZIS S53. Because it says here, and it's only as long as the door of the truck. But Wargaming decided that even despite the fact it's not a D5T-85BM, they should just copy-paste the stats and even give it superior rate of fire, improving its damage per minute significantly over the regular T-34-85. You can see here the firepower is superior, penetrates more, some gun depression. It aims faster, and it has more armor. It's only on the mobility side and the camouflage. It doesn't have superior camouflage. That's interesting. I thought the regular T-34-85 had superior camouflage. I guess I was wrong. Even in that, the T-34-85 it's better. Okay. Anyway, the regular T-34 only has slightly better mobility, and by slightly it's just a bit. It's from 15.5 to almost 18. It doesn't make that much of a difference. When you have much better armor this level of armor 75 allows it to deal with lower tiers much easily, and the damage per minute makes it even easier. But using the in-game comparison tool doesn't show you how they compare to each other that well, because some very important stats such as the gun handling and the terrain resistance, it's hidden, because 10 years in the making and wargaming still doesn't show you all the information that actually matters. But fortunately we have Tanks GG for that. So T-34-85M, and when I compare it to the T-34-85, you get better damage per minute, better reload, same alpha damage, better aim time, better gun handling just a tiny bit, and the aim time is only just 0.1, but it does make a difference. It's only on the internal module L points that you can see a quite significant difference, but this is not that much of a problem, and how much it impacts the outcome, it's questionable, the outcome of a battle, because you won't rely on that if you just don't get penetrated. You won't take any module damage. Now, here is an interesting part. So it does get worse terrain resistance and it's slower, sure, but it's not that much slower. But here is an interesting part. You get a total weight of 32 tons on the T-34-85M, which has more armor than on the regular T-34-85. Doesn't make much sense, right? You can, when looking at the 3D model, the turret, it's pretty much the same as a regular T-34-85. It's on the upper plates that's all the magic happens, because when you angle it, you can get a lot of effectiveness for tier 6 medium tank, and while the turret it's not that reliable, it's still you still get lots of odd bounces. So it's actually more reliable to just shoot the upper plate if you know you have enough penetration overall, other than the driver's viewport, which is pretty strong. The upper plate can be reliably penetrated if you know you have the penetration for it, unlike on the turret, which it's a smaller target and you can get shots on the edges or some odd part on the gun shield, etc. While the regular T-34-85 just gets easily penetrated by pretty much everything it meets, other than just the weakest of the tier 4 tanks. Now, both tanks are gonna struggle against higher tiers. They meet tier 7 and tier 8, and the superior armor on the T-34-85, it's not gonna matter much, but the superior rate of fire, the damage per minute over the regular T-34, it's gonna make a difference. So if I just mount this S53 and there compare it to the T-34-85, which is supposed to also have a ZIS S53, you can see the gun stats are significantly different, and this is it's bullshit, right? I think it's pointless to name the guns if you're just gonna make them perform so differently. But it could be explained if you were actually using different ammunition, because you can have the same gun, but the ammunition will make... There are many different kinds of AP shells and APCR shells. So let's see if that is the case. It's this one has the T-34-85 as the UBR 365K. Now if I look at the T-34-85M with the ZIS S83, it has a UBR 365K BM, which is a funny thing, because I'm quite sure this is the shell from the Top Gun on the T-34-85. But I'm not sure. So D5T85 BM, and that's the shell. So it's actually using a shell from a different gun. I don't know if this has any basis for realism or whatever you can call it, but I doubt it. I highly doubt it. So we have seen how the 85 just outperforms the T-34-85 as being a premium tank, outperforms a regular T-34-85, which is available to everyone, which makes it pay to win. How does it compare to Type 58, which is very similar? Type 58, I know it's worse than regular T-34-85. Right off because it's slower. Although there's not a big difference, but the gun is way worse. It penetrates because it's actually, it only has the ZIS FS53 as the Top Gun, as can be seen here. It's a copy, but the stats are pretty much similar. And overall it doesn't perform very well, especially because of the poor accuracy. Even though it's just a tiny difference, but it's still an inferior gun, so it's gonna struggle a lot more against higher tiers and won't have that much advantage against same tier or lower. Now, another thing that you can notice about the T-34-85M and how powerful it is, it's when you compare it to I'm not going to compare it to the Rudy, because the Rudy just has it also has a ZIS S53 with copy-paste setting performance, so it doesn't really matter. But even the T-34-85M outperforms it, even though the Rudy seems to be to have way better terrain resistance. It doesn't have the armor or the damage per minute, and armor and damage per minute matter a lot more. So if I compare the T-34-85M to a tier 7, you will notice how much difference it makes. And in this case, the T-43, which is a very similar tank. So you have a tier 6 medium that has the same gun. Well, it doesn't have the same gun, but has a gun that performs the same, despite in theory being an inferior gun. And it performs better than a tank that is very similar but one tier above. If this makes any sense, then I don't know. The gun depression is a bit worse, but this is kind of pointless because we are talking about one tier of difference. Sure, it's a tier higher, so it gets more health points and other stuff such as view range, etc. But when you look at the 3D model, even on the armor, before that, let me look at the mobility, comparison of the mobility. So the mobility that T-43 gets, it's very likely similar to the advantage the regular T-34-85 gets over the 85M. It's just a bit more mobility with slightly better terrain resistance. But the armor, it doesn't show here, but you will see the armor on the T-34-85 ends up being a lot more effective. So you get 75 on the front, and the turret, it's pretty much the same turret as on the T-34. You get 75 still, but with a less efficient angle, so the armor is not as good. The lower plate, it's, while it's bigger, it's slightly better, but not by much. It doesn't make much difference. And sure, it has 75 all around, but overall it's not much of an improvement, because you still have the same turret. You have worse firepower, and the frontal armor, the area that it's gonna mostly take shots, it's worse than a premium tank of a lower tier. That's how much T-34-85M has been buffed. It was pretty weak when it was introduced, but actually it was really, T-34-85M was bad when it was introduced, because it was over nerfed unnecessarily when in comparison to the regular T-34-85, and then it received a massive buff, which is something Wargaming has been doing for a very long time, something that I can't understand. They could make tiny adjustments, slight adjustments to tanks and see how they affect the performance, but instead they just make huge impactful changes every time. It has been seen recently with FV4005, when it was introduced. For a very long time it was underpowered, and then one day they decided to buff it. And did they buff it a lot? I don't think it needed to be nerfed as it was. And similarly, the Type 5 and Type 4, they were underpowered for a long time, and they got buffed, and now they are being nerfed, and rightly so, to be honest, because those derps, they don't add much to the gameplay. On the contrary. Let me compare it to one other tier 7 tank, the T-34-100 Constructor. You can see here the copy of the ZS-53, I guess, with very similar stats, but that's not its top gun, ideal top gun. So you still get a lot more DPM, which is okay because you have less alpha damage. But overall, even on the armor, for example, you have superior armor to a tank that is one tier above. So I don't know. I just think in terms of damage per minute and the added armor, it's just way too good. And I'm not saying nerf it. I'm just saying buff the rest, because I think that pleases everyone and doesn't piss many people off. And but anyway, sure, the T-34M has a copy-pasted stats from a different gun, but reality is, what about the regular ZS-53? Is it historically accurate? Does it have realistic penetration values or not? So the reality is, it sort of has, it sort of doesn't. First of all, because when looking at the penetration, the APCR penetration, the AP and the AP penetration is not very far from what it should be realistically. And I can confirm this by looking at these guns, this S-53 in War Thunder. So In War Thunder, you have two T-34-85s. You have the one with the D5T. This is not the D5T-85M. It's just the standard D5T, which was superior to the ZIS S53, but was more complicated to produce. At least that's what I've read somewhere. But in War Thunder, they have very similar performances. You can see here it penetrates 140 millimeters, depending on the ammunition. But you can see here this shell, the 365K. It's the same shell that is being used on World of Tanks, and it penetrates at 140. And when you look at the ZIS S53 with this shell, it penetrates 140. So the fact it penetrates 144, even though it is copying the stats from a different gun, it's not inaccurate. That much inaccurate. It's okay. What is not okay is the fact it is copying it, and then you have a ZIS F53 in game that performs way worse than it should. So anyway, with APCR it penetrates 175, which is, in comparison, in World of Tanks, the D5T-85M penetrates 194 or 167, depending if it's the premium tank or regular tank. But these are not all of the shells that were available for the ZIS S53. If we look at the ZIS S53 on the T-44, it gets better shells. It gets an AP shell that penetrates 159 and then a PCR that penetrates 229. Now, I believe the way it would make the game fair, would make World of Tanks fairer for everyone, was if T-34-85M didn't have an inherent advantage over the regular T-34-85. And by this I mean is simply superior in every aspect, pretty much, other than the mobility, which is has a minor impact because it's only a minor difference. So if Wargaming wanted to give it more realistic performance while retaining what and making both vehicles perform differently, so the T-34-85M should only get an APCR that penetrates 175, for example, and an AP of 140 millimeters of penetration. With the superior armor, it would perform really well against lower tiers on the same tier. While the regular T-34-85 could get an AP with 159 millimeters of penetration and an APCR with 229. This would allow this extra penetration wouldn't give it any advantage against same tier and lower tier, any real advantage, but it would perform better against higher tiers in relation to T-34-85M. And if you think 229 millimeters of penetration it's a lot for tier 6, it's not, because you have tanks like the Hellcat which penetrate 243 among others. So it would separate both tanks in terms of gameplay, in terms of how good they are, what they are better at, while allowing them to overall, over the course of many battles, perform very similarly, because T-34-85 would be able to carry more games. Also, you wouldn't need that fake, not fake, but prototype gun, the D5T-85M, because just the regular ZIS S53, it's enough. You don't need to use prototype guns that were only used for trials and or were never used in combat, etc. You can just use a regular gun because there is available ammunition. You can respect the historical performance in that way. And that's it. I think this is how you should approach the game, and not the way wargaming currently is.